control or the recovery team, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. But as a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself. During reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from an orbital velocity of about 17,500 miles per hour. The top temperature that Dragon will experience upon reentry is about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and we do expect this blackout period to last for another 6 minutes or so. We are expecting to hear back from Jasmine at 0941 UTC or 2:41 a.m. Pacific time, and sometimes we actually acquire that signal earlier than anticipated, so we might actually hear from her a bit sooner than that.
And this is my one last plug, because it does not always re-enter over the United States. If you are in those states we've mentioned several times,
go now.
This is literally, you have like 30 seconds, so sprint outside and go and see it. We are very much so looking forward to seeing the Crew splashdown and seeing them re-enter from our side, but it's not going to be the same view, certainly, as what you all will have. So I hope some of you are out there looking up and enjoying the view for us.
Absolutely. Now, we do hope to bring you views from a thermal tracking cam that we hope to have once the capsule is visible. I believe the WB-57 might be on the prowl tonight, and hopefully we will also be able to bring views. We have cameras located on our recovery vessel Megan, which is in place awaiting splashdown. It's about a mile or so away from the splashdown site, and so we'll also have cameras there. So as soon as we have something to bring you, we certainly will. Once again, the capsule is going from orbital velocity about 17,000 miles per hour down to a speed of about 350 miles per hour. At that point in time, the drogue parachutes will deploy. Those are the smaller parachutes that help to stabilize the capsule and help decelerate it even further, down to about 119 miles per hour. At that point in time, and that's roughly at about 6,500 feet above the ocean surface, the main parachutes will deploy. And once again, we will hopefully bring you views once we have those. And then, of course, once those main parachutes deploy, it's just a few seconds. Excuse me, it's actually more than a few seconds, because it's several thousand feet off the ocean floor. Ocean surface, excuse me. But ultimately, those main parachutes will help to decelerate the capsule down to about 15, 16 miles per hour when it ultimately splashes down. And we are expecting that splashdown time to occur at 5:47 a.m. Eastern Time, 2:47 a.m. Pacific Time.
Yep, now less than 10 minutes, and then once splashdown occurs, we'll continue to walk you through all of the recovery operations and step through those together and explain what you're seeing on your screen. But it really is a testament to all the hard work and the folks that are pulled together to do these recovery operations. As you said, the boat was staged earlier this evening, and everything is set up and ready for Crew-7 to splash down 9 minutes and 30 seconds from now. We expect that acquisition of signal, that blackout period, to end in about 4 minutes or less from now. Again, as you mentioned, we might begin to hear the Corps start to call out to the crew to see if they've regained communications with them yet. Sometimes it happens a little earlier than we expect, sometimes a little bit later. All of that is normal. It just is dependent upon when we regain communications with the crew. So again, we're expecting that acquisition of signal in about 3 minutes and 30 seconds, and it looks like we are getting our very first view of Dragon there on your screen. It is streaking through the sky as it continues to re-enter the atmosphere. Again, those parachutes have not quite deployed just yet, but once they are through the atmosphere successfully, we'll first see the drogue chutes deploy. We're targeting 2:43 a.m. Pacific for that, and just seconds later at 2:44 a.m. we'll see the main chutes deploy, and of course splashdown at 2:47 a.m. Pacific off the coast of Pensacola.
Yeah, this view is a thermal view, tracking cam from NASA's WB-57 plane. I always love seeing this come through because just the brightness gives you a good idea of, and it will start to get dimmer and dimmer as we get closer to the drogue parachute deployment. This looks like it is a live view coming from Megan, which is the recovery vessel positioned a safe distance away from the anticipated splashdown site. I believe this is the tracking cam, not thermal, more. I'm not sure the right way to describe it, but it's a live view camera, but adjusted for the darkness of the night sky. So that's why the pixels on the camera might look a little wonky there.
And even from this view, it's just spectacular. So amazing to see. We are expecting the acquisition of signal to be about 2 minutes from now, and splashdown, again, we're less than 10 minutes away from that, 7 minutes or so away from splashdown of Crew-7 to wrap up their 6-month science and research mission to the International Space Station.
Dragoon SpaceX, com check.
SpaceX Dragon, we have you loud and clear.
All right, so that was the voice.
We have you the same. Expect automated chute deployment.
As the voice of Commander Jasmine Mugbelly.
Automated chute deployment.
Great to hear her voice on the other side of the comms blackout. And a great view here, that thermal cam showing us live reentry of the Crew-7 team on board Dragon Endurance.
And the Corps also did let Jasmine Mugbelly and the Crew-7 crew know that they expect a nominal or normal drogue chute deploy, expecting us to maybe begin to get some views of that here in about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes from now. And then following that will be the main chutes that deploy. Continuing to get some really incredible views of Crew-7.
Dragoon SpaceX GPS is converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
All right, good news there. That's an indicator that we can expect the drogue parachutes to release about the 350 mile per hour speed, or about 18,000 feet above the ocean. As I mentioned, the streak becomes dimmer just prior to the chute deployment. This view here is coming to us from our recovery vessel Megan, which is the large vessel that will make its way out to the capsule and ultimately pick it up out of the ocean and place it in the nest on board. Now we should see the drogues pop out here.
Brace for drogue window.
The thermal cam will provide us a much better view of the parachute deployment.
So we are standing by for those drogues to deploy. We should see that begin to happen here any second from now.
Tracking to about 15 seconds until drogue deploy. Once again, Dragon is reading its altitude as well as barometric pressure to determine when the appropriate, and there we can see the drogues deploying now, the appropriate time to deploy those drogue parachutes.
And so these drogue parachutes do help to stabilize and decelerate the vehicle ahead of the mains being deployed a short time after.
Expecting mains at about 30.
Descent rate nominal.
All right, that's great news there, indicating that the rate of deceleration with the drogue chutes is as expected. The main parachutes will deploy next. That will occur around the 6,500 foot mark above the ocean surface. And at that point in time, the capsule will be traveling around 120 miles per hour, and we can see those main parachutes deploying now. Those drogue parachutes will land in the ocean, and hopefully we will be able to recover them, but they kind of sink quickly sometimes, so the recovery teams will go out and try to recover those drogue parachutes for reuse on future cargo missions. We can see here.
Main chute descent rate nominal.
Great news there, indicating that the deceleration rate of the...
Copy 1000.
So at this point in time, Jasmine is now transitioning into calling out Dragon's altitude. Beautiful thermal view there of the capsule and 4 healthy mains. It's hard to tell in this view because, again, it is thermal, but the parachutes are orange and white. If you've seen a daytime launch, you'll know what they look like, and we should be able to see, hopefully...
800 meters.
Dragon is now 800 meters.
Copy 800.
Above the ocean. Now, once Dragon splashes down, the capsule will automatically cut the ties to the parachutes. This helps in the case where it might be windy. It isn't today. Wind speeds are pretty low at the moment.
600 meters.
But if it were a little windy, it would help to ensure that
Copy 6.
That Dragon doesn't get destabilized by having the main parachutes. And we will also recover those main parachutes from as they float in the ocean as well.
And standing by for that splashdown, now about a minute away from that or less.
400 meters.
400 meters is what Jasmine just called out. So the next call out we'll hear is for 200 meters, and then of course splashdown. So continuing to get great views of 4 healthy mains, as well as the Crew Dragon with 4 astronauts on board.
Bracing at 200.
And the crew is bracing for splashdown. We do hear that the fast
SpaceX
boats,
copies 200 and braced.
the fast boats are en route. Standing by for splashdown.
What a beautiful sight. As you can see on your screen, we have
Dragon Splashdown.
SpaceX copies. See the same.
visual and audio confirmation for splashdown of Dragon Endurance. It has now returned home, and NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, along with ESA astronaut Andy Mogensen, JAXA astronaut Satoshi Furukawa, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Konstantin Borisov are back on Earth after an approximately 18.5-hour return journey from space. The SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon splashdown, and they are now making their way to that splashdown site.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see Crew-7 back on Earth after 199 days in space. They splashed down at 5:47 a.m. Eastern Time, and the teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away in preparation for splashdown. So,
Dragon SpaceX, on behalf of all of SpaceX, welcome home. We're with you in 4.800.
SpaceX is in Stardust. Thanks for the ride up, and more importantly, the safe ride down. And thank you to NASA to be back on planet Earth.
and we did hear some words from NASA astronaut Jasmine
SpaceX
Mogbelli.
copies, mains cut.
We didn't quite catch them all, but of course the sentiment was her thanks for the folks that have helped supported their mission and ensured that they got back home safely on Earth. You can see that the sea is really quite smooth. It doesn't look like it's too choppy at all. And we also did hear the confirmation that the drogue parachutes were successfully cut as expected. That is something that happens in the recovery process here.
What we're looking at right now is a thermal image. And once we are able, excuse me, let me rephrase that. Once the recovery vessel is closer.
I think it's stable 1.
Copy, stable 1.
So that was just Jasmine reporting on Dragon's position for splashdown. This orientation is known as stable 1, as we've seen in all of our Dragon splashdowns. But once Megan gets closer, recovery vessel Megan gets closer to the capsule, we'll be able to have not thermal, but just regular views, because those vessels that are on its way, the fast boats, as well as Megan, have lights and bright lights at that. And so we'll be able to see better views of Dragon once the recovery vessel gets a little bit closer. But that takes several minutes to complete, as the capsule, as the recovery team has been waiting 3 nautical miles away from the splashdown site. So it'll take a few minutes for Megan to chug along over to recover the Crew-7 team.
And we did see a lot of social media hits of folks in the Midwest as they watched Crew-7 re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. But we actually have someone on the phone who had a bird's eye view on the recovery vessel Megan. We have NASA's Rebecca Turkington, a NASA Public Affairs Officer at the Johnson Space Center, who was on the boat during the re-entry and splashdown. So again, she had a great first-hand view of the crew returning and splashing down. So Rebecca, how can you hear us?
Dragon SpaceX is go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in 1 minute.
That's great to hear, Rebecca, and we are hearing some communications to the crew.
Expect recovery personnel in 1 minute.
That we do expect the recovery personnel to begin to approach.
Permission to come on board via the display camera view only.
So while we work through that...
Hey, Sandra, how do you hear me?
And Dragon wanted to come on board with all cameras if you'd like.
And Rebecca, we're going to come back to you in just a minute as we work through these dynamic operations for recovery. Stand by and we'll be back with you in just a minute. And so we did hear those communications to Crew-7, letting them know that the recovery teams would begin to approach here momentarily, so we might be able to get some views on our screens as we see those fast boats begin to approach the Dragon capsule.
Exactly. So there's, excuse me, a couple fast boats that are dedicated to retrieving the parachutes out of the water, as well as a fast boat that will be dedicated to approaching the capsule and basically using personal protective equipment to for the folks that are on the boat, because at this point in time, Dragon has just come back from space. It's possible that there are some residual hypergolic fumes around the Draco thrusters and around the nose cone. So the team is actually going to approach with a hypergol sniffer.
SpaceX, just for awareness, we are on board with the display camera at this time.
Okay, copy, on board with display camera.
And that was just SpaceX Core letting the Crew-7 team know that there it is, that view is online once again. This allows us to see over their shoulders and once again see what they're looking at on their screens. At this point in time, it should be pretty stagnant in terms of none of the Draco thrusters are going to be firing anymore. They're already back in the water, so there's no trajectory to look at. And there we can see on the right-hand side of your screen one of those fast boats approaching the Dragon Endurance capsule. And as I was saying, there could be residual hypergolic fumes or left over around the Draco thrusters or around the nose cones. So that team is actually approaching with PPE or personal protective equipment such as respirators and masks to approach closely Dragon Endurance, but they will actually use a hypergol sniffer to detect whether or not there are any of those fumes lingering. This takes a couple minutes to complete, and once they basically check and get green light in terms of no residuals, no fumes lingering, they will give the green light for the rest of the recovery team to approach the capsule and begin the rigging of the capsule for onboarding it onto the recovery vessel. But I think the communications have slowed down for a minute, so I'd love to hear what it was like on the boat.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to Rebecca Turkington, NASA Public Affairs Officer, who was on the boat during Crew-7 re-entry and splashdown. And let's see if we do have a good comms check with her at this point. Rebecca, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. How do you read me?
We've got you loud and clear. Thank you so much for your patience there as we work through some of those communications back and forth with the crew. So I would love to know, Rebecca, how was the view from the recovery vessel? What was it like? Tell us everything.
Well, I think a lot of us on board the ship have a new core memory after seeing Dragon splash down this morning. We were about 1.5 nautical miles away from the landing zone, had a great view from the front of the ship. We saw the spacecraft appear across the horizon, a gorgeous reflection on the ocean, heard a really nice sonic boom, and we tracked Dragon all the way down to splashdown. And it's great to see Crew-7 back home, and wow, just what a way to start the morning.
I love to hear that. I can tell from the excitement in your voice that it was pretty spectacular. So I'm so happy you were able to witness this. So the next question we have for you is about the weather. We've been tracking the weather throughout this journey. Teams, of course, gave the go for landing off of Pensacola here today. So how have the landing conditions been from your perspective?
Well, Sandra, Crew-7 may have missed out on fall and winter back here on Earth while they were on board the International Space Station, but they're going to get a little taste of it this morning. It's in the low 40s out here, but winds are very light, coming in about 2 miles per hour, and we have just about 1 foot of wave height. You can really barely feel it on the ship right now. Wow. So conditions are about as ideal as they can be when it comes to those wind and waves, but it will definitely be a very refreshing first breath for the crew that they take back here on Earth.
Absolutely. That sea really looks glass-like almost. So just a couple more questions for you. Can you describe the journey of the recovery forces to get to this point and what that entailed?
Yeah, absolutely. So our original journey started almost close to a week ago in Florida with so many teams coming in to make preparations for the crew's return. After Pensacola was selected as our splashdown site, the recovery team and the vessels were relocated here. And for splashdown this morning, it was an early start. We took a series of helicopters out to the recovery vessel starting at about 4.5 hours before splashdown. The medical team and recovery director were on that first flight,
Dragoon
and the
SpaceX,
rest of us followed after
hypergol
that.
Sweeps and unfired ordnance checks are nominal. Rigging is now in progress.
That's great to hear, Rebecca, and we are hearing that the hypergol...
Stand by for PMC with SpaceX flight surgeon.
Dragon Capital, standing by for PMC.
Again, we are hearing that the hypergol checks were nominal. They did not detect any of that. So our very last question for you, Rebecca, before we continue to talk through the recovery process is what's next to retrieve the crew?
Yes, I'm sure you'll walk everyone through how Dragon's going to be hoisted onto the recovery vessel. After the crew has egressed the vehicle on the ship, they will head over to the med bay where they'll get checked out by our medical team, and they'll also start to take off those white dynamic spacesuits. And after their medical checks, they will board a helicopter and head to the airport where a plane is waiting to take them back to Houston to begin their post-flight period. I also wanted to mention that the crew is not the only ones on board Dragon. We also have really important cargo in science from experiments that are going to deliver benefits for people back here on Earth. So the cargo team will also start working this morning through the rest of the day to inventory and process those high-priority cargo items. Some teams are going to come in here to Florida to pick those up, and then others we are going to ship out to various NASA centers. So it's just been such a beautiful splashdown this morning, and so happy and proud to be here. And with that, I'll turn things back over to you at Hawthorne.
Well, there you had it, a firsthand experience of what it was like to witness Crew-7 splash down off of Pensacola. Thank you so much for your time, Rebecca. That was Rebecca Turkington, NASA Public Affairs Officer at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas.
All right, so as you can see there on your screen, that's a live view on the left-hand side inside Dragon Endurance. On the right-hand side is thermal cam tracking the recovery operations.
Dragon SpaceX com check on Dragon to ground public.
We've got you loud and clear.
All right, have you the same. I'll be back on board with updates as we get closer to capsule lift.
Okay, we copy. Thanks.
So while the Crew-7 crew members were doing their private conference with the flight surgeon post-splashdown, just an initial check to make sure that everybody's feeling okay, doing good. We took those comms out, and so that was just a check to make sure that we got the comms back on the public feed. This is actually here our first live view of a normal camera of recovery operations.
Dragon SpaceX, be advised, we're going to be transitioning the forward link. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
Okay, Dragon copy. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
So at this point in time, the recovery team is kind of split in half. Half of them are located on the recovery vessel Megan, which is the location from which we were receiving that camera view that we just had previously. This one is obviously coming from inside the Dragon capsule. But the other half of the recovery teams are in those fast boats. They've been tasked with retrieving the parachutes from the water, as well as performing the safety checks post-splashdown. Once again, those were basically performing checks to make sure there weren't any hypergolic or pyrotechnic residuals, which, obviously pyrotechnic could be dangerous for explosive reasons, but hypergolics are incredibly poisonous if you breathe them. So we weren't able to see it super clearly on the screen. However, the crew out there had personal protective equipment to ensure that they were breathing, clean air while they were performing those checks. Those sweeps we heard were nominal, so that was the green light for the other portion of the fast boat crew to approach. And there is actually a SpaceX recovery team member crawling around the capsule at this moment in time. Hopefully we can get that view back momentarily. It looked like there might have been something in the way of the camera previously, but when we have that view back, we'll bring it to you. But there's an individual responsible for basically securing the harnesses around the capsule itself. Those will be used to lift the capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. But of course, those straps have to be put in place by hand. So there's somebody, actually you can, I think that was actually Jasmine's hand that we saw in the shadow. I thought maybe we might be able to see the the shadow of the individual crawling around the capsule through the window. But yeah, there's somebody actually crawling around to place those harnesses in the correct position and secure them. There's a number of harnesses that are required as the vehicle itself is quite heavy, and once those are all in place, we will lift the vehicle up into the recovery vessel using hydraulic lifts, and that will basically put the capsule onto the vessel in a nest, which is movable. We basically plop the capsule into the nest on the aft end of the vessel, and then we translate, or we pull that nest forward so that the side hatch is at the unloading platform, which of course is where we will see the crew egress from the capsule. Now, we can actually see that side hatch where they're about to egress from there at the bottom center of your screen. It's the item there that is in a black outline. Pardon me. That side hatch is the same hatch that they used to ingress. How many days did you say? 199 days?
Yes, they were in space for 199 days. Of those, 197 were on board space station, of course, to include the transit to and from space station.
Gotcha. So all that time, that side hatch has remained closed as the crew was utilizing the forward hatch to ingress and egress the space station, of course, because that's where the docking adapter is located. So that's the point in which Dragon has to dock with the space station. So yeah, that side hatch that we can kind of see there, it will open for the first time in hundreds of days, and it will be Crew-7's first breath of fresh air since they lifted off. That side hatch, of course, goes through multiple checks while it's still on the ground, and it obviously is not intended for use while it is while the vehicle is on station.
Yeah, absolutely right. And if you're just joining us, it's been a busy but very exciting early morning for us here in Hawthorne. Crew-7 splashed down off of the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 2:47 a.m. Pacific time. The crew is still in the capsule awaiting to be fully recovered while the team works through that. They'll eventually, as you were discussing, Kate, be moved onto the boat and be able to get out of the hatch that is directly in front of them. But just some quick facts about the Crew-7 mission. As we said, they spent 199 days in space total. Of those, 197 were spent on the International Space Station. They completed 3,184 orbits of the Earth and traveled more than 84,434,000 statute miles around the Earth, which is just a massive number when you think about it. Andy Mogensen has logged 199 days in space over his increments. Of course, he was a part of Expedition 69 and 70, and will have totaled 209 days in space, including time from his previous space flight. This is NASA astronaut and commander of Crew-7, Jasmine Mogbelli's first space flight, so of course she's logged 199 days in space. Satoshi Furukawa of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency has the most time in space of this crew. He has logged a total of 366 days in space over 2 flights. And Konstantin Borisov of Roscosmos has spent 199 days in space as well. This was his very first space flight. Just a couple more fun facts for you all. The crew saw the arrival of 7 visiting vehicles, which included 2 SpaceX cargo Dragons. That was SpaceX 28 and SpaceX 29.
Dragon SpaceX, com check.
Dragon has you loud and clear. How many?
Loud and clear. Forward link transition is complete.
Copy.
And so we did hear that call out a few minutes ago that there would be about a 5-minute comms outage while they work to get communications configured. All of that is now configured properly, so we might hear some more communications back and forth with the crew ahead of their recovery and placement on the recovery vessel. But just to continue those fun facts for you all, so the crew did see 7 visiting vehicles arrive. They saw 7 visiting vehicles depart, and there was 1 spacewalk that took place during the Crew-7 mission, and that included NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli for a 6-hour and 42-minute spacewalk, the very first in her career.
Wow, what an incredible stay on station.
And the hundreds of science experiments that they also contributed to as well, so they were certainly busy during this increment.
I bet they're probably looking forward to a nap or two once they are back on firm ground and have gone through their end of mission proceedings.
Yep, absolutely. And once they are successfully on the recovery boat, they will take that helicopter back to Florida since they splashed down off the coast of Pensacola, and then they'll ride in a plane back to Houston and complete some additional medical checks, some rehabilitation, and then for both Satoshi and Constantine, they'll fly back, and Andy as well, they'll fly back to their respective countries. This was the very first mission, actually, where every single seat is occupied by a member from a different space agency. So that's exciting to see as well.
Very cool. Now, on the note of recovery after performing a long duration space flight, we will be assisting the crew members outside as they egress through the side hatch. This is standard procedure for NASA crew missions, because they have been up there for an extensive amount of time. And of course, the body changes while you're in microgravity.
Dragon SpaceX rigging is complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
All right, so that's great news there.
Dragon Cap is about 5 minutes to lift.
So you can see the recovery platform there in the foreground of this particular view. That is exactly where the crew will ultimately be assisted to. And then we can see the Dragon capsule in the background there, bobbing very gently in the silky black waters there. I have to say, I've covered, this is probably my 6th, maybe 7th Splashdown webcast, and this is, to my memory, the smoothest sea I've ever seen. Some of the views that we had earlier, the water just looked like glass. The waves are so calm. So it's great to see. Obviously, those make for easier, quicker recovery conditions. We did hear about a minute ago that we're 5 minutes out, so now 4 minutes out from lifting the capsule. There is a hydraulic lift there at the back end of the capsule. Oh, there's a great view of it there with our recovery team members positioning the hydraulic lift into place. The team member that was on the capsule, I think they may have jumped off already. Yeah, it looks like the fast boat is departing. So that's always one of my favorite, but also like terrifying moments to watch, is that SpaceX team member with, oh, actually, no, they're still there. So the area where they're standing is actually the bay where the main parachutes are packed. So all 4 parachutes are packed so tightly, they fit back there into that bin you could think of. So that SpaceX recovery team member is doing the final preparations for the harnesses there on Dragon Endurance, which will be basically hooked onto by the rigging. We can see that hydraulic lift now being lowered. Once everything is attached, we will see that individual that is on the capsule jump off into the water. And of course, we don't want them to be on the capsule while it is being translated up and onto the vessel for obvious safety reasons.
And Dragon will remain in the nest during the crew extraction and then for the journey back into port. So we'll stand by for that lifting to happen just a couple minutes from now once they get everything successfully secured. And so I did just want to jump into, we were talking a bit about the crew and how they would be helped out of the capsule, and this is a very standard procedure for NASA.
Dragon SpaceX, brace for capsule lift.
Dragon Cappy, braces for lift.
And so we will see that individual jump off the capsule here in just a second, and then the capsule will be lifted onto the recovery vessel.
I like to think of this as the SpaceX swan dive. And there we can see jumped in and is now making his way over to the fast boat where his SpaceX recovery team members will pull him on board just like that. And now don't blink because the lifting of the capsule takes just a matter of seconds. It's quite smooth and happens rather quickly. Like you were saying, we're going to lift that up out of the water and place it in the nest. That nest will then get translated to the recovery deck, and there we can see Dragon Endurance now being lifted out of the water using those hydraulic lifts. Swinging a little bit, but it will be centered using the tethers and then placed into that nest once centered. all in all, this seems like a pretty quick recovery. Let's see, if we had splashdown at
247.
57. I don't want to call this for sure, but this definitely feels like one of the fastest recoveries I've ever been a part of.
Dragoon SpaceX, welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are now completing final checks and stand by for translation to egress platform.
I can copy.
So at 6:14 a.m. Eastern, 3:14 a.m. Pacific, Dragon Endurance has been lifted up and out of the Gulf of Mexico and is now secure on our recovery vessel.
And so next up, we will see Dragon appear to slide forward as it gets a little further in on the recovery vessel, and then the team will work to open up that hatch and get the crew out. Again, we do expect the crew to be assisted in getting removed from the capsule because they have been aboard the International Space Station for the past 6 months. Even though they work out for a couple hours a day to maintain bone and muscle health, the adjustment back to the 1G environment on Earth can be something that takes a little getting used to. So as a safety precaution, we always do just help any of our crew members returning from space out of the vessel. So again, we're about 30 minutes or so since we splashed down, or since Crew-7 rather splashed down off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. They're already on the recovery vessel, and we are just awaiting the next steps in the process in order to get the crew out safe and sound. And the hatch that they'll actually be exiting or egressing from is in the center of your screen there. It's kind of a square-shaped it's a square-shaped hatch there, and we'll see the teams install a bit of hardware around the edge of the hatch once they get it open to help protect it, and then we'll see the crew come out. But we also will see the footrest get removed to give a little more space for the crew as they work through those recovery operations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we want to ensure that astronaut safety is, priority number one, and removing those footrests helps with that because, like you said, we will be assisting the crew to egress out of the capsule, and removing the footrest just gives the recovery teams a bit more room inside the capsule to move around along with the crew.
Absolutely, and you can see a more internal view of the hatch that we were just referring to there. Towards the lower portion of your screen, you can see the black outline around it. That is, of course, the hatch that the crew will exit out of. That's been closed since they entered in Dragon all the way back in August for their launch.
For those of you that have just recently tuned in, we had an on-time splashdown of Crew-7 at 5:47 a.m. Eastern, 2:47 a.m. Pacific, and just 3 minutes ago, the Dragon Endurance capsule, excuse me, was lifted up and out of the water and into the nest of the recovery vessel. The recovery vessel utilized for Gulf operations is Megan, and one not being used today is for the Atlantic operations. And what we see here are, this is a cool view because we can see it better now. I want to point it out before we lose it, is that bay where the main parachutes are stored. That is the rounded square just below the side hatch, right underneath where that individual is stepping into. So if you can imagine, that gives you a good perspective of just how tightly those main parachutes have to be packed in there in order to stow them and obviously release them. And the drogue parachutes, for those of you that might be wondering, we don't really have quite as good of a view, but they come from the bay just above the side hatch.
And so the next major milestone that we will look ahead to see is when Dragon will slide a little further back in the recovery boat, like we mentioned earlier, and then we'll have the hatch opening process begin to get underway. So again, everything continuing to go really smoothly this morning following a splashdown at 2:47 a.m. Pacific of Crew-7, completing their 199-day mission in space, 197 days aboard the International Space Station. The crew actually undocked from the International Space Station yesterday morning at 8:20 a.m. Pacific. So like we mentioned, a little less than 24 hours for their journey back to Earth. But everything going smoothly. They splashed down successfully off the coast of Pensacola, and now the recovery team is just working through those procedures in order to get the hatch open and get the crew out here shortly.
At this point in time, as you can see, the Dragon vehicle is still positioned at the aft end of the recovery vessel. Once everything is in place, we will translate the nest where the capsule is sitting forward toward the forward end of the vessel, and that is where the recovery deck is located, where additional SpaceX team members and NASA team members are awaiting. The Crew-7 team, SpaceX team members will go through the side hatch opening procedure, which involves an additional sweep for hypergolics and like you mentioned earlier, removing the side hatch and placing a bit of protective covering around the edge of the side hatch. This helps to protect not only the capsule, but also the team members that are going in the capsule to help the Crew-7 crew members egress through the side hatch.
So it does look like they are starting to wrap up this portion of Dragon being in the nest. So we should expect that translation to occur here in just a couple minutes from now. They'll remove some of those attachments from the vehicle before that translation occurs. And so from this view, we do have a pretty good view of both the nose cone being closed, which closed prior to splashdown, but that is the hatch that the crew used when they docked to the International Space Station, as well as entered the International Space Station. It's not the one that they're going to exit out of this morning, though. They're going to exit out of that side hatch there. You can see it in the middle of the Dragon capsule.
We also have a good view of Dragon's thermal protection system, also known as TPS. That is all of the white paneling around the side. Of course, after re-entry, it is a little less white than before. If you recall, on launch day, it was a pristine white, and that is not the case anymore, as the thermal protection system has done its job, and quite beautifully. I love how no capsule return is identical. They're kind of like a fingerprint. They all look a little different.
And following the crew getting out of the Dragon, they will, as we mentioned, be taken by helicopter back to shore, and then eventually back by plane to Houston, Texas. And the Dragon vehicle will be refurbished, taken back to the processing facility in order to be reused again. And so it does look like we are seeing that translation on your screen. And another view here, we can continue to see that translation as it occurs. It'll get put right in between those two gate-looking areas, and then the crew can begin to work hatch opening operations.
We can also see a SpaceX team member hosing the vehicle down. This helps to wash some of the salt water off. Obviously, we want to ensure that corrosion is controlled. Anything that comes into contact with salt water, salt in general, is quite corrosive, and so we're going to start basically rinsing the capsule off to try and remove as much of that salt water as possible.
And so some of the next steps that we'll see will be personnel on the recovery vessel that are specialized in opening up the hatch begin that process.
Yeah, we can actually see they've donned their PPE once again, so they're going to perform some additional safety checks to ensure that there are no hypergolic residuals or fumes there around the side hatch. Once again, this is the hypergolic fumes are toxic if you breathe them in, so we want to ensure that none of those are remaining.
And this view back inside Dragon, as you can see, NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, commander, and ESA, European Space Agency astronaut Andy Mogensen. It's Jasmine's first flight, and it is Andy's second space flight. And so we also do have medical doctors on board that help to take care of the crew after the hatch opening and will conduct a series of initial checks before they are flown off by that helicopter back to shore. So as the team continues to work through those hatch opening operations, it is important to note that Jasmine Mogbelli, Andy Mogensen, Satoshi Furukawa, and Konstantin Borisov will be getting some assistance from their recovery teams while they exit the capsule. So this is the same process for any returning long-duration space flight for Dragon. You also see it when we have the Soyuz that lands with crew on board. They're helped out of the capsule and then transported via chair over to the medical recovery tent. So this is standard operating procedure for long-duration space flights. So it hasn't even been an hour since Crew-7 splashed down at 2:47 a.m. Pacific, and they are already on the recovery vessel. The team has secured them in the Dragon's nest and completed that translation maneuver to get them a little bit closer into the prime position for hatch opening. And they are beginning to step through some of those procedures to get that hatch open here shortly. Getting another view here of the hatch. You can see it pretty clearly in your screen. And
we can see that they've removed the access panel on the side hatch. Excuse me. That side hatch access panel basically protects the location where we perform the side hatch leak check. So we will...
Dragon SpaceX, stand by for side hatch opening and egress. We'll be passing you off to the recovery team, and see you back in Hawthorne soon.
Dragon captains, they're here.
So yeah, that side hatch access panel is where we are able to untorque as you can see in action now.
And the side hatch is open for the first time in 199 days. Looks like we're getting some waves from Crew-7. First face they've seen back on Earth since August.
Once again, this is their first breath of fresh air in several months, and once again, the first time that the side hatch has been open. The last time it was open was the day they went to space. So it looks like here just the SpaceX team member doing initial check-in with the crew, making sure that everybody is feeling okay and feels ready to egress from the capsule. Probably letting them know that there is, no return trip at this moment, no rocket in place.
I'll have to wait to be reassigned for the next one, I guess. So again, Crew-7 launched back in August 26th of 2023. So in all, they spent 199 days in space. And so we will begin to see some of that safety equipment installed around the hatch just for protection purposes and for reuse capabilities. And then we'll even begin to see some of those footrests begin to be removed to just give the crew a little more space to get out.
But first, a photo opportunity.
Yep, absolutely.
We probably couldn't see it from this view, but I have a feeling that there was some thumbs up for the photo. So at this point in time, we should see some of those footrests begin to be removed. Not entirely sure what the order will be here in terms of who will egress first. It always varies from crew to crew, but it looks like we may have some footrests coming off now. Once again, this just allows the folks that are assisting the crew in their egress a little bit more room to work. Fun fact, the footrests are custom sized to each astronaut in terms of like small, medium, or large. So in order to ensure maximum safety and comfort, we customize the footrest as well as the armrest, as well as the bucket itself, the seat bucket rather, that they sit in. As every astronaut is different, and so to ensure that everybody is able to remain comfortable and safe, those items are customized for their body proportions as well as the spacesuits themselves. Speaking of spacesuits, we can see that those visors are in the open and up position. So once the crew was safely splashed down, they were given the okay to lift the visors. No need to keep those down and in the locked position once we were outside of those dynamic events. For those of you that have just recently joined us, we had a beautiful nighttime splashdown at 5:47 a.m. Eastern or 2:47 a.m. Pacific. The Dragon Endurance vehicle is now on board our recovery vessel Megan in the Gulf, just off the coast of Florida near Pensacola, and we're now awaiting the egress or the exit of our 4 Crew-7 members. And this will be assisted out onto the recovery deck.
And the recovery vessel is actually named after NASA astronaut Megan McArthur. She flew on board Crew-2. That was my first space launch I ever got to see in person, so really special to get to see her launch. She also flew on board STS-125. So great to see Crew-7 back on board Megan's namesake. We are expecting egress here in just a couple minutes. They are working to install that safety equipment around the hatch as well as remove the footrests. And so we typically will either see the commander or the pilot egress or get out of their seats first, and that's just due to the proximity of their location to the hatch. Usually it's a little easier to get one of those two out ahead of the mission specialists on either side.
Now you mentioned the namesake for Megan. Of course, our the Atlantic Recovery Vessel is named after Shannon Walker, who flew on the NASA Crew-1 mission. So we named these recovery vessels after our first 2 female astronauts to fly in our Dragon capsules. So I love the tribute there that we have paid to these incredible women that have taken part in spaceflight here at SpaceX.
So as they continue to step through those procedures, again, just a reminder, we do expect the crew to be assisted out of the vehicle, as well as be assisted in standing up and getting rolled away in order for those initial medical checks. This is standard for all long-duration space flights. And they'll jump right into their post-flight reconditioning period that begins on splashdown day, and it lasts for about 45 days to help return crew members to their pre-flight condition. Like we've mentioned, they do exercise while on board the International Space Station for a couple hours a day, and that does help maintain some bone and muscle mass and prevent that loss. But because of the microgravity environment of the International Space Station, there is still a recovery period that takes place. And again, that's about a 45-day period to just get them back to pre-flight condition.
Now, immediately after they egress from the capsule, they will be transported back into, excuse me, one of the medical bays that are on board the recovery vessel, where they will be seen by the flight surgeon for a preliminary medical checkup immediately after egressing.
It looks like we are going to have our very first views of egress here.
I think that may have been Andy.
This is Andy's second spaceflight. He's from the European Space Agency. And Andy Mogensen now out of Crew-7 capsule. And you see he is getting assisted there. That is completely normal, and as expected, this will take place for all 4 crew members.
Yeah, this is standard procedure when we egress the NASA astronauts from Dragon. We assist them into, it's not quite a wheelchair, it's not quite a, I can't think of the word for it. It's not a gurney, but we roll them back into the medical bay, and this just helps ensure their safety, because sometimes, even though we had amazing recovery conditions tonight, it's not always the case. Sometimes we can get wave height of a couple feet, which could make for an unstable vessel. So regardless of the sea conditions, we always assist the crew in getting out of the capsule and making their way back to the medical bay.
We did see some thumbs up and some cheers for Andy Mogensen as he egressed the capsule. Next up is going to be the commander of Crew-7. That's NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli. This is her first spaceflight.
What an experience it must be, this first time of feeling gravity for really kind of the first time, because if you're born into it and you don't really know what it's like to not feel it, I could imagine it would be quite an experience to feel it and really feel it for, at this magnitude for the first time.
And some waves there from NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli. So next up out of the capsule will be the 2 mission specialists, Konstantin Borisov from Roscosmos, as well as Satoshi Furukawa from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. So if you're just joining us, Crew-7 splashdown off the coast of Florida at 2:47 a.m. Pacific. We've had 2 crew members already egress or exit the capsule. That was European Space Agency astronaut Andy Mogensen, as well as NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli. And there's 2 more astronauts on board, and we're working through those egress procedures, everything going really smoothly. Following this, the crew will fly back to shore via helicopter, and then they will fly by plane back to Houston, and from there they will go to their respective countries. Again, as we mentioned, this is the very first space flight where every single seat was occupied by a member of a different space agency. We are seeing on our screen there another one of the footrests as it is removed, just to give the crew, the recovery crew rather, a little more space in order to help get the crew out.
As we mentioned, 2 of the 4 have already egressed. Excuse me, we already have Commander Jasmine Mogbelli and pilot Andreas Mogensen. They've already exited. We now have Konstantin Borisov and Satoshi Furukawa still on board. Excuse me, it's early or late.
Furukawa.
Thank you, Furukawa. Still on board the Dragon capsule. And we should see one of them egress here just momentarily.
And it looks like they're beginning to egress now. I believe this is Konstantin Borisov of Roscosmos, his first space flight. And Konstantin Borisov has successfully egressed. Some handshakes there, it looks like.
Thumbs up and happy waves.
Yep. So the remaining Crew-7 crew member inside Dragon is JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Satoshi Furukawa. Again, this is his second space flight. And so Satoshi Furukawa actually has the most time spent in space of Crew-7. He's logged a total of 366 days in space over 2 flights. So just a little over a year in space in all.
That's incredible. And it looks like he is now egressing. Once again, this is standard procedure for assisting all the crew members into the medical bays.
And Satoshi Furukawa, the last member of Crew-7, now out of the vehicle.
So I just did a bit of math. Now that we have officially egressed all 4 crew members, we had an on-time splashdown at 2:47 a.m. Pacific. We lifted we lifted the capsule onto the recovery vessel at 3:14 a.m. So that was a total of 27 minutes for recovery operations. And then it was from 3:14 a.m. to 3:42 a.m. when we completed egress, another 28 minutes. So it basically took just as long to lift them out of the water as it did to bring them out of the capsule. So all in all, really efficient recovery operations. So congrats to the SpaceX recovery team on such efficient operations there.
Absolutely. Less than an hour from splashdown to egress. So great to see that. And now that Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical team, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. So this all kicked off on in August of 2023 from historic launch pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. After a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine made a 29-hour flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station. And since arriving at the space station, they spent nearly 6 months as members of Expedition 69 and 70, executing science experiments, a spacewalk, and repairs while aboard the orbiting laboratory.
Their journey home began about 19 hours ago on March 11th when they closed the hatch to Dragon and undocked from the space station at 8:20 a.m. Pacific time. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for re-entry this morning. We jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the approximately 14-minute-long deorbit burn at 1:56 a.m. Pacific time or 4:56 a.m. Eastern time, and that ultimately is what put Dragon on its path home. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 healthy mains, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 2:47 a.m. Pacific time or 5:47 a.m. Eastern time. Now, as you saw following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts move in quickly and prepare Dragon Endurance for its lift into the recovery vessel, or onto the recovery vessel, and in just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Next up, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore where they'll transfer to aircraft that will take them home. Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston, and then they'll be reunited with families to bring an end to this mission. It's been an honor and a privilege to share this journey with all of you as we continue in this new era in human spaceflight.
Return today marks the end of the direct handover that we just executed after successfully launching the Crew-7 mission to the space station just a little over a week ago. It's been an incredible honor and joy to share this mission with the public. All of the teams from SpaceX and NASA continue to work hard to keep America leading the world in human spaceflight. Continue to follow SpaceX and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we will, of course, continue to share the progress of Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine on social media as they travel back home. We also have a post-splashdown media telecon coming up at approximately 4 a.m. Pacific, 7 a.m. Eastern, where leadership from NASA, JAXA, ESA, and SpaceX will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. So we'll say thanks one more time for tuning in and cheering on Jasmine, Andy, Satoshi, and Constantine as they made their return back to Earth. From all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, Crew-7, and on behalf of the many incredible females who have supported Crew-7 and contributed to the success of this mission across NASA and SpaceX, ESA and JAXA and Roscosmos, happy Women's History Month. So long.